Do you expect Silicon Valley to be the unipolar leader of the venture capital industry? Or do you expect the VC industry to, over the next, let's say, decade or 2 decades, truly become multipolar?
I think it will be multipolar. And the reason I argue this is that, the way you do venture capital investing is sort of counterintuitive, right? Most human beings, we know from behavioral science, are, keen to protect their losses. And they're willing to take quite a lot of risk, actually, to protect themselves, to sort of make up a loss on the downside. But they're not willing to, really take a big risk to reach for that big upside. And venture capital is all about those few companies that make the big upside. So it's contrary to human instinct to invest in this power law fashion. And that's why, for a long time, a relatively small group of people had figured this out. They were mostly in Northern California, and they kind of kept the secret among themselves. And therefore, Silicon Valley totally dominated the game of doing venture capital-backed startups. But around 2005, the big venture capital groups in California started to go abroad. And, Sequoia, Accel, and others went to China, went to India, and a bit later, they went to Europe. And all of these places, I think, are going to do well. And, you already see, if you look at the curve of the growth of the number of startups, the number of unicorns, the amount of venture capital dollars deployed in all of these newer geographies, it's very impressive. It's clearly growing exponentially. And that's why I think it's going to be multipolar. The caveat is that there are some places which just have too small of a local market to enable those huge outcomes that you need to pay for the inevitable losses. And so in those places, it's going to be tough to make venture capital work. I was in Kenya recently, meeting with venture capitalists there. And I would love to argue, since I like Africa, I lived in Africa for a bit as a journalist, I would love to argue that venture capital is going to be a terrific hit in Africa. I just feel that until you build a single market in Africa, which we're a long way from, a big outcome in an economy the size of Kenya isn't quite big enough to really make the engine hum.
And do you think those are the two main ingredients then, like the availability of capital by these VC firms, either the global ones coming there or rise of homegrown VCs, as India has seen, and many of these other countries that you were mentioning, China, Europe, Africa also have seen? Is it just the access to capital and the availability of a large market? Or is it that there's something in that mindset? Because the other argument I've often heard is that this mindset that exists in Silicon Valley has been critical to adopting the power law kind of investment thesis that VC firms have, which is failure is okay. 15 of the 20 companies failing is okay.
Yeah.
I'll wait for that one. Do you feel that mindset is critical? And if so, are you seeing that mindset travel as easily as maybe the capital has been?
Culture changes is my view. And yes, Silicon Valley has this strange idea that, failure is a learning experience, and it's an honorable thing to go through. And it might sound odd, but when you get venture capital established in other countries, it's going to change the mindset, because you turn a single shot game as an entrepreneur, where if you fail, that's probably your last chance at it, to potentially a multi-shot game where, if you start a company, you get a venture capitalist who backs you, then the company fails, but it wasn't your fault, but maybe something like some big rival entered your market and knocked you out of the water. But the VC has been with you at board meetings, stayed in touch with you, has seen that you really gave it all that you had, and you were smart and determined and gutsy. That VC is going to say, right, well, that was a learning experience, and this is a good entrepreneur, and I'll back the next company that this entrepreneur wants to start. And so I always think these cultural generalizations are flimsy. They're just sort of the outgrowth of the conditions, including the availability of venture capital.